So, if you were to sit down and watch all 3 extended Lord of the Rings movies, it would take you the best part of 11 hours. And really, who's watching the theatrical versions anymore? If you want to experience this story in all of its cinematic glory, this is the only way to do it. The extended way. But considering all of the taxing action sequences, tricky special effects, and massive crew, tempers of the cast were bound to fray. Wearing full armor in sweltering heat or having prosthetics applied to your face at 4 in the morning probably wears thin pretty bloody fast. But remember, one does not simply adapt The Lord of the Rings with ease after all. Still, the examples on this list are definitely times where the actors wish that they could have had a bit more time to chill out. So let's take a look at them. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and this is The Lord of the Rings 10 Scenes Actors Hated Shooting. Number 10. Sean Astin got pissed off with Andy Serkis' method. Before Peter Jackson developed a means to record motion capture on set, Andy Serkis spent his days acting as the physical representation of Gollum for Sean Astin and Elijah Wood to play off. Serkis would then have to replicate all of the physical exertion he put into those shots on a motion capture stage, effectively doing his job twice, meaning he must have been absolutely shattered. Although Serkis' original performances were cut out and replaced with a digital character, the impact of his actions were not unnoticed. The shots of Frodo and Sam wrestling with a digital creature only felt authentic because Serkis threw himself into the role with such passion. Serkis' method was so full on that it actually resulted in a bit of a tense moment between himself and his fellow cast member Sean Astin. During a scene in the Two Towers, the hobbits are about to make a break for the Black Gate, only for Gollum to pull them back. In one take, Serkis pulled with so much force that he yanked Sean's wig off, along with a big clump of his hair. Astin stormed off of the set, leaving a frosty atmosphere between the two for the rest of the day. Number 9. Christopher Lee kept tripping on his costume. Christopher Lee's on-screen presence has been unrivaled in cinema history. He's made countless Hammer horror movies where he defined the modern image of Dracula. He starred as one of the most iconic Bond villains, Scaramanga, and of course gave an unforgettable portrayal as one of the most powerful Sith Lords in the Star Wars universe. Christopher Lee was the one actor who knew Tolkien's work the best. He was such an avid fan of the books that he read them once a year, every year for decades. So when he was given the chance to play Saruman, he had both the acting chops and background knowledge to capture the character's majesty and menace perfectly. By all accounts, he relished the task of bringing the wizard to life, but during one particular scene, Lee found his costume to be such a hindrance that it caused him to forget his cool demeanor. Just before Saruman reveals himself as a servant of Sauron, Lee's costume was so long, however, that with every step, he'd actually trip. Eventually, this caused him to exclaim, "I cannot get up these goddamn steps, Peter." After an icy period of silence, someone sheepishly replied, "But you did it this morning," which Lee then later claimed put him in his place. Number 8. Miranda Otto was left in tears after her big scene. One of the most climactic moments in the entire series came during the Return of the King, where the forces of good clashed against the forces of Mordor. It was one of the greatest and most complex battle sequences put to screen. Thousands of charging horsemen were seen sweeping away tens of thousands of orcs. Dozens of gigantic creatures were shown wreaking havoc on an epic scale, and King Theoden gave his rousing battle speech before gloriously dying. The climax then came when Éowyn heroically defeated the Witch King, brandishing the line, "I am no man," with all the ferocity of a sword, and it was very captivating stuff. But such a breathtaking sequence didn't come without its challenges. Actress Miranda Otto portrayed the Shield Maiden of Rohan perfectly, and she'd be the first to admit that she wasn't actually a natural swordsman, however, and the work she put into wielding the blade definitely took its toll. Although the fight sequences were performed with safety weapons, she still had to exert a huge amount of energy to sell the scene, and which is no easy task when you're going up against the 6-foot-something actor who played the Witch King. Peter Jackson worked Otto so hard that apparently she was left in tears by the end of the shoot. Number 7. Andy Serkis almost froze trying to catch a fish. Andy Serkis' portrayal of Gollum revolutionized the way animated characters were depicted on screen. Originally, Serkis was only hired as a voice actor, but when Peter Jackson saw the physical exertion he put into his performance, however, he brought him on set for the other actors to work off. And this was before motion capture existed as it does now. Back then, Serkis would have to act out all of Gollum's mannerisms on set and then repeat the process in a motion capture studio. And he ruined his body by mimicking Gollum's erratic movements over and over in order to map the movements for the digital character. Eventually, the production team developed a way to record mocap alongside the real-life footage, but that wasn't the case early on in shooting. And one early scene involved Gollum struggling through a stream as he tried to capture a fish. And Serkis was brought in as a guide for the camera to follow, which seems pretty simple, right? But the temperature of the water was so cold, however, that after a few takes he began to lose feeling in his limbs. This was particularly alarming given the location in question was right atop of a waterfall, and Serkis had to repeat the process over and over and later referred to this as one of the toughest days on the job ever. Number 6. The entire Fellowship was sick of CARADHRAS. One of the most pivotal moments in the Fellowship of the Ring came when the desperate company were forced to find an alternative route through the Misty Mountains. The decision would lead them to the mines of Moria, where they encountered a demon of the ancient world, the Balrog, which resulted in the gut-wrenching air quotes death of Gandalf the Grey. Although the decision was perhaps unwise, the company was given no other choice. While trying to cross the snowy peaks of CARADHRAS, Saruman conjured a freezing snowstorm to batter their route, effectively stopping them in their path. Watching the scene, no one could have blamed their decision. I mean, those hobbits looked as though they were about to die. For obvious reasons, Peter Jackson couldn't film this scene on location. Health and safety would have a bloody field day. Instead, the entire sequence was filmed in studio under glaring lights. The cast spent days wrapped in their winter costumes under the scorching heats of the studio lights. And what's more, the fake snow was made from an irritant substance that caused their eyes to itch and their skin to turn red. It certainly helped sell the scene though, because none of the Fellowship looked particularly comfortable. Number 5. Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan's Unmentionables took a battering from Treebeard. One of the truly remarkable aspects of the trilogy was Peter Jackson's propensity for building so much of the world that we saw. He used miniatures of the major fortresses to give a sense of authenticity to the wider shots. Whole sets were built to portray the likes of the House of Elrond, and for the most part, the orcs were portrayed by real actors in prosthetics. One character was particularly impressive though. The 14-foot Treebeard was built as a huge animatronic prop, controlled by a number of puppeteers. Certain shots required the help of CGI and the character's face was digitized, but for the most part, it was all real. It gave the two Hobbit actors something to interact with, helping sell not only their performances, but also the believability of the character. But certain aspects of those interactions left both Hobbits a little uncomfortable. For a number of scenes, the two are shown being carried by the giant Ent. Now, for comfort reasons, bicycle seats were hidden in the Ent's giant hands for the actors to sit on, because getting the two actors in and out of all the safety harnesses was just too tedious to do between every take, meaning that both actors were often left in the seats for prolonged periods of time, leaving their Hobbit unmentionables somewhat sore. Number 4. Bruce Spence couldn't see anything as the mouth of Sauron. When it came to casting the mouth of Sauron, Peter Jackson wanted an actor with a certain presence. After all, in place of the Eye of Sauron, this was the character that portrayed the physical representation of evil. So he ended up casting New Zealand actor Bruce Spence, known for his portrayal of the unhinged gyro captain in Mad Max 2. Ironically, you wouldn't have any idea it was Spence though, given his costume hid the majority of his features, and his voice was digitally altered. But even so, he did a great job of conveying the twisted evil of Sauron's chief servant, and the costume definitely looked the part, but it was incredibly inhibiting for the actor. Due to the character's name, the design team wanted to draw as much emphasis to his twisted mouth as possible. They theorized that he was blind, and therefore his giant helmet would have no need for eye holes. Now, it worked in theory, but this resulted in Bruce Spence being completely blind for all of his shots. And given that he had to ride a horse to a certain mark, this proved to be an utter nightmare. What's more, his horse was acting up for most of the shoot, leaving Spence, an untrained rider, feeling more than a little vulnerable. Number 3. The Hobbits hated saying farewell at the Grey Havens. Movies are very rarely shot in linear sequence, because shooting schedules are much more dependent on location and budget logistics, so it's often the case that the big culminating moment of the movie is shot whenever the schedule permits. And this was the case of The Lord of the Rings. We all remember that emotional goodbye when Frodo departs with Gandalf to the Undying Lands, leaving his companions on the shoreline. But this emotional scene was shot right in the middle of principal photography, and the actors were left apprehensive at having to summon up so much emotion during a very early part of production. According to all 4 Hobbits, the experience was one of the most taxing and draining of the entire shoot. Having to cry on demand for take after take all day cannot be an easy task. But when they wrapped up, everyone felt though the sacrifice had been worthwhile. The footage they got back seemed to be brilliant until somebody pointed out an error. It turned out that Sean Astin had removed his waistcoat during a break and neglected to put it back on. All of the footage was out of whack and the continuity was blown, and this resulted in all 4 actors having to go through the emotional turmoil all over again. Number 2. Pretty much every actor suffered at Helm's Deep. The Battle of Helm's Deep was the epic culmination to the Two Towers. The forces of Rohan, augmented by a small force of elves, were shown stoically facing down the armies of Isengard. It was one of the biggest battle sequences ever put to the big screen, and one of the most exciting climaxes to a movie. Creating the sequence was a mammoth undertaking. The fortress itself was built almost in its entirety to serve as a backdrop. Hundreds of extras and stuntmen were required to make up the armies, and a plethora of crew members and medics were required on set at all times. Over 20 hours of footage was recorded over a period of 4 months. 3.5 of those months were night shoots, and half of the time the actors were drenched in rain and frozen to the core. Running around play fighting with a bunch of orcs and elves does sound fun in theory, but when you're doing it night after night in terrible weather conditions, anyone would be bound to get fed up. Things got so miserable at times that the stunt crew, dressed as Uruk-hai, would perform hakas in an attempt to keep spirits up. Several stuntmen received injuries after falling from the tops of the walls, and Viggo Mortensen lost a tooth to a rogue sword swing. When the shoot was over, everyone on the crew received t-shirts saying, "I survived Helm's Deep," in commiseration for what they'd all gone through. And number 1, Viggo Mortensen thought Aragorn's coronation was rushed. By the time filming was well underway, Peter Jackson realised that he couldn't possibly capture all the footage he required in the time span given. Early on, he created a second and third production unit to focus on scenes that he was too busy to direct himself. Even then, the crew was hard-pressed to get principal photography completed by the deadline. Towards the end of the production, things were up to 7 units, all working 7 days a week in a desperate struggle to get things done. This resulted in actors having to shoot several scenes for all 3 movies in a single day. Needless to say, this took a strain on the mental fortitude of some of the cast. Films are rarely shot in linear sequence, but imagine having to portray your character at dozens of different stages in the story in a single day. What's more, many of the most important scenes were pretty rushed. When it came to filming Aragorn's crowning sequence, there was barely any time for prep or retakes. Viggo Mortensen found shooting his character's culminating moment a depressing experience. He just spent close to a year developing Aragorn's story arc, but when it came to his big moment, he was worn out and frustrated by how it was handled. And there we go, my friends. That was the Lord of the Rings 10 scenes actors hated shooting. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can swing by Live and Let's Dice, where I do all of my streaming outside of work, and it'd be great to see you over there. But before I go, I just want to say one thing. Hope you're treating yourself well with love and respect, my friend, because you deserve all of the best things in life, and do not let anything or anyone else tell you otherwise, alright? You're a massive ledge. Now go out there and absolutely smash it today. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that. And I'll speak to you soon. Bye.